Good. Welcome everyone to this panel on reproductive justice and privacy. I'm going to kick it over to our wonderful moderator, Kiwa Jang, who's going to kick us off.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for joining for today's discussion. It's really impactful and look at the impact of the Dobbs decision in the digital age. We've brought together a great intersection of speakers to share how the decision kind of impacts the reproductive rights of different communities. And as John mentioned, my name is Kiwa. I go by she, her pronouns. I'll be the moderator for today's amazing panel discussion. I am a volunteer attorney with the Privacy Rights Clearinghouse and the regional director of the National Women of Color Collective. Before we introduce our amazing panelists, I want to acknowledge that this event is made possible in part by the support of the Rose Foundation for Communities and the Environment. In the months and years to come, PRC is working towards building a broader coalition that incorporates different communities in the intersectional fight to improve privacy for all. So a bit about today's format before we start. To begin, we'll have a moderated hour-long discussion followed by Q&A. So please feel free to use the Zoom Q&A function. We'll be collecting and monitoring those questions throughout, and hopefully we'll get to as many as we can towards the end. And we'll also try to maybe incorporate some throughout the discussion. So without further ado, I'll let each of our panelists introduce themselves and share a little bit about the type of work they do and where they're coming from. Just to kick it off, I'll start with Eva.
Hi there, I'm Eva Galperin. I'm the director of cybersecurity at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. I am the geek on this panel in the sense that I mostly do technical work. Most of my work revolves around privacy and security research, focusing on vulnerable populations, of which abortion providers, people who provide abortion support, and people who may become pregnant or who may be looking to end their pregnancies are very suddenly kind of thrust into this category. So that's a lot of what I've been working on. Specifically, I have been working on providing privacy and security advice to these populations for the last several months.
Thank you so much. And then we'll go to Ariela.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ariela Cuellar. I also go by Ari or Ari. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the communication specialist at the California LGBTQ Health and Human Services Network. I also identify as queer, a dog mom, an intersectional feminist, and a digital creative. And it's wonderful to be in this space with you all this morning. I'm calling from Modesto, California, otherwise known as the indigenous land of the Yokuts people. So just wanted to state that land acknowledgement. And also just wanted to share a little bit about the network and a little bit about what we do. So we work with community-based organizations, nonprofit providers, researchers, and community centers all throughout the state to collectively advocate for state-level policies and resources to advance LGBTQ+ health equity in California. The network has two prominent programs, one of them being We Breathe, which focuses more on lowering LGBTQ tobacco-related disparities because LGBTQ folks smoke at a rate that is twice as high than straight and cisgender folks due to various reasons, some of those including just the stress and trauma that comes with being LGBTQ. It's also a part of our culture within like leather and kink communities. So of course, that is one of the main objectives we have at the network. And our other program is centered around mental health. So our Out for Mental Health program supports over 15 community-based organizations all throughout California, ranging from Humboldt County to Imperial County. And just working to create goals and advocacy initiatives to improve access to gender-affirming mental health care. We also work on passing specific legislation to help improve health equity among our communities, such as Senate Bill 9223, which passed earlier this year, also known as the TGI Inclusive Care Act, which helps to improve transgender, diverse, and intersex folks and their access to medical providers who are culturally competent in LGBTQ issues. And the bill also requires physicians to take evidence-based culturally competent training so that they can also better serve and care for our TGI community members. So that's a little bit about what we do, and yeah, excited to be on this panel with everyone.
I'm really glad to have you here. And then last but not least, we have Lauren.
Hi there. My name is Lauren Wranosky. I use she and they pronouns. My background is predominantly in social work and policy, but I am here as a representative of National Advocates for Pregnant Women, who we are a legal advocacy organization who provides legal defense, secure local counsel, and provides strategic legal guidance and secure expert medical and other witnesses for folks facing criminalization on the basis of their pregnancy. That can include drug use during pregnancy, an abortion, a pregnancy loss, a forced medical intervention, or even a postpartum child welfare case. So we are sort of the on the grounds representative on this panel today. And so really looking forward to this, this discussion with you all.
Thank you so much. Once again, really appreciate all of you guys for taking the time to chat with us today about this really important topic that's impacted so many people. Just to kick off our moderated discussion, I'll start with Eva. So after the Dobbs decision, you kind of wrote a little bit about tech companies being uniquely positioned to protect reproductive data. If you can just talk a little bit about what you like to see these tech companies do in that respect.
Sure. So the biggest difference between now and the sort of pre-Roe, the last time that that abortion was outlawed to various extents in a variety of states, is that now we live in a time of unprecedented digital surveillance, and most of that surveillance is mediated by companies, and they're not always companies that we think of as technology companies, but the companies that, so it's not just social media platforms, but it's telcos who usually don't get enough attention for the kind of information that they collect about people. It is nearly everybody who purchases online advertising, the people who make all of the Internet of things in your home, everybody who makes mobile apps, as well as the entire industry that is built around data mining and sort of creating these very very nuanced pictures of who individuals are based on their behavior online by sort of collating a bunch of different databases together. And these are the sort of the data broker industry. So there are a lot of people to pressure. It's not just about yelling at Meta and Google and Twitter or TikTok. And fortunately, there are some really great models for how to apply this kind of pressure, because a lot of this discussion around the amount of digital information which is being gathered about individuals has been, sort of discussed in our communities for about a decade and a half. A lot of this discussion goes back to the NSA's warrantless wiretapping program, which was started in 2003, which was sort of revealed around 2006, and which EFF has been suing the US government about for more than a decade now. One of the things that you learn about impact litigation is that the wheels of justice move very, very slowly, sometimes backwards. So what we do is we go to the various companies, and we try to get them to think about their data collection practices. The idea being that every single person whose data you collect and store is a person that you may eventually get a warrant or a subpoena for that data from a state in which abortion is illegal. And you need to think about whether or not you really need to collect that data, whether or not you need to store it for as long as you've stored it, whether or not it needs to be identifying data, and most importantly, whether or not if you do need that data, you can end-to-end encrypt it so that all that you are storing is a blob of ciphertext, which is not useful to governments and anyone who shows up with a warrant or a subpoena. And that is, on one hand, sometimes a very major ask. But on the other hand, sometimes it's just pressuring companies to do things that they were going to do anyway. For example, there was a recent case in which a woman was prosecuted for her pregnancy outcome, and some of the evidence that was used against her were the contents of a Facebook Messenger chat that she had with her mother. We have been trying to get Facebook and Meta to end-to-end encrypt Facebook Messenger chats by default for about 5 or 6 years now. And they have been promising us the whole time, oh yeah, any minute now, it's totally on the timeline. We're really going to get to that. Now Meta is promising, oh yeah, we're totally going to get to that in 2023, which is cold comfort to this woman who is still being prosecuted, and certainly cold comfort to the people who are going to be prosecuted for this kind of behavior in the future.
Absolutely. Yeah. You brought up data brokers. I think, folks immediately brought to mind kind of the period apps, the fertility apps. That was what was immediately getting scrutiny after the Dobbs decision. So if, you can talk a little bit about how do data brokers, or how can they surveil people who are seeking information or access to abortion, or maybe explain a little bit about what data brokers are. I think it hasn't been in the news as much in terms of reproductive justice as like the apps have been.
Yeah. So almost everybody who wants to talk about data collection comes to me and says, well, should we delete our period tracking apps? Surely it's our period tracking apps that are tracking the most important information about our reproductive health. This is totally where governments and law enforcement are going to go if they want to prove that somebody has had an abortion in a state where an abortion is illegal. This is not the case. What we do when we're trying to provide privacy and security advice to ordinary people, especially people who are pregnant, who are in crisis, who are having a very bad day and do not have time to become some sort of super spy in order to protect their data, is we try to keep it as simple as possible, and we try to make sure that the advice we give actually addresses the kind of evidence that is being brought in cases. And the evidence that we're seeing right now is emails, SMS messages, chat messages, sometimes location data from cell phones, and often the person who is being prosecuted has been turned in by somebody that they trust. Sometimes a family member, often a doctor or a nurse. And so the most important advice that we can give to people is not even technical advice. It is be careful who you trust, be careful who you talk to about your pregnancy. But even beyond that, we try to encourage people to use end-to-end encrypted communications with disappearing messages turned on, so that when your endpoint, when your device is seized, the message is no longer on your device. And that is some really important messaging. But beyond that, once it becomes more difficult for governments and law enforcement to get the sort of low-hanging fruit of your emails and your SMSs and your Facebook Messenger messages, then we expect that the government will start going to data brokers, that they will start trying to, sort of create these dragnets of, show me people who are crossing state lines in order to go to Planned Parenthood. Show me the people who are going to this website, which tells you about reproductive health or how to carry out a self-managed abortion. So what we really need to do when we're talking to companies, which is very different from what we do when we are talking to individuals, is we need to look towards the future. We need to look at future threats. And a lot of that happens because companies are large ships, and it takes a very long time for to turn them around. And so they need to be thinking about these threats in advance, so that a couple years down the line, when the threat comes, they have already changed the way their systems work, so as to foil this future plan. The downside of this is that it's very difficult to convince companies about threats that have not yet come. And most of what I do is sort of point to the ways in which the U.S. law enforcement carried out the quote unquote war on terror and the war on drugs, and basically say that what we are looking at in the future is a war on abortion. And when this happens, you're likely to see them use the same tools, the same kind of warrants, the same kind of subpoenas, the same kind of pressures. And when that happens, it's really important that you not have the information, because otherwise it is on you. You are turning in vulnerable people who trust you with their data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think the future looking aspect of it is so important because we're being very reactive in the moment. There's more to come. There's things that'll happen down the line. Kind of speaking towards that idea of surveilling folks, crossing state lines. There's obviously already a lot of spy tech being used and will continue to be used by police to kind of surveil people who are accessing kind of abortion, especially in states that have already banned it. What are some kind of surveillance techniques that you might think that folks aren't as aware of, or maybe become more aware of?
What a lot of people aren't aware of is that, when you go to a website, it registers the IP address that you are coming from. This can be used to sort of figure out what your geographic location is, and sometimes also to identify you as a user. So that's usually the main one. Your phone is a tracking device. Your phone regularly, speaks to nearby cell phone towers in order to let the cell phone tower know where you are. This happens under nearly all circumstances, unless your phone is turned off. As long as if you can receive messages and you can make phone calls and you can receive phone calls, then your phone is talking to cell phone towers. And I think a lot of people sort of miss this. They feel like there are ways to dodge cell phone towers. If your phone is working, your phone is speaking to cell phone towers. And those cell phone towers give away a lot about your location, because what the cell phone tower does is it triangulates your location in order to send your messages, or in order to receive your messages. A lot of people miss that. There is also the fact that you simply enter a lot of information about yourself into websites and apps every day, and you don't control that information. A lot of people are not familiar with the third-party doctrine, and so they're not aware that governments and law enforcement can simply show up and demand that information from the platform or the intermediary or the telco, and they are not legally obliged to tell you about it because it's not your data, it's their data. Often these companies have a policy in which they will tell you if they can that your data has been requested, so that you can turn around and hire an attorney and possibly look at the warrant or fight the subpoena. But that's not always the case. And so the best case scenario is either that they don't have the information in the first place, or that you are not storing the information with them in the first place.
Absolutely. And now we're going to shift over to Ari. But before I do so, I do want to mention that PRC is sponsoring a data broker bill in California's legislature. So that'll be something for folks to look out for and hopefully support and read through. So let's just jump right over to Ari and some of the ways the Dobbs decision has impacted LGBTQ community and, you know, their access to healthcare, not just reproductive health. Just to begin, if you can just talk a little bit about kind of access to general healthcare, you know, has been a concern for LGBTQ community even before Dobbs. There are high levels of discrimination, disparity outcomes. So what have been some of the unique clinical gaps when LGBTQ patients try to access reproductive care?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are a lot of gaps among our communities trying to access reproductive care, but also just like general medical care for our everyday needs. And more specifically, I think the transgender community who experiences higher rates of discrimination and mistreatment and even denial of care when seeking healthcare often, you know, find it difficult to even find a medical provider who has the knowledge and is able to, you know, provide trans competent healthcare to those folks. So there's a huge gap in just like basic cultural humility training. You know, so like basic things like using the correct pronouns, not dead naming someone intentionally or unintentionally. And there's also just like a general lack of trust within the LGBTQ community when accessing medical care overall, from history of discrimination or mistreatment or malpractice. And even like the fear of being outed, like having to disclose your sexual partner or the fact that you are in a same-sex marriage or whatever. And I think there's also, you know, a huge gap in like the language that we use. You know, not a lot of folks are trained on how to deal with LGBTQ community members, and also more specifically like trans men or trans masculine identifying folks, or people who are gender diverse, but they can also, you know, give birth. Just based off of that language we use to describe reproductive care is also very dated. So including more gender neutral terminology is something that medical providers need to be trained on. And encouraging, you know, trans mass folks or even gender diverse people who have had maybe, you know, top surgery or don't identify as the sex assigned at birth, you know, encouraging them to get pap smears, encouraging them to get mammograms, and not, and I think that's not really highlighted enough. And I think that messaging needs to come directly from medical providers or those clinics providing those services to encourage that community to be more, you know, to seek out that care more actively. And I think, you know, there's also that vulnerability that comes with even going to the doctor. It's like you're trusting that person to be the expert, and when they're not the expert, and you're having to like just define what being trans or what being gender nonconforming is, you're you know, let down and kind of disappointed in that experience, and that doesn't make you want to go back. So I think people in California think that we're all very progressive and everyone knows about all things LGBTQ, but that's definitely not the case. So there's definitely a lot of room for growth in that area.
Yeah, definitely. And kind of tying back to what Eva has said, it's not always your tech, it's not your phone that's betraying you, it's the folks that you are talking to, you know, the doctors, the nurses. So inclusive care is incredibly important. And then just kind of talking about how the Dobbs decision has impacted the way folks in the community are approaching reproductive care now that, you know, there's an additional pressure on top of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I mean, like the LGBTQ community has, for a long history of time, just been overly resilient in multiple intersecting ways, like, and just being proactive about getting our needs met, regardless of like what state entity or federal, you know, or even like, you know, societal views people have on that community. Like even before it was legal to be married to a same-sex partner, people were still having same-sex relationships. Even before gender affirming care was a thing, trans folks would still find resources from friends or underground economies, the black market, to find those resources like estrogen or testosterone shots, before medical providers even prescribed it. And so I think having, the Dobbs decision be overturned, I think that definitely makes community members approach reproductive rights in a more community-centered way. All that to say that like community members will get access to reproductive care one way or another. It may not always be the safest way, but it's always going to happen. And just, finding more community-centered approaches to taking that to take place in the near future, I think would greatly support that need, because like we're just like resilient in the sense that like when we find those gaps within our own care or within our own communities, we're gonna find them, one way or another, like I said.
Yeah, definitely. It's helped the community move forward, the resiliency of it. And you've touched upon a little bit about kind of gender affirming care. And in some states, the overturning of Roe has been used as justification for opposing bills that kind of want to protect gender affirming care and other transgender rights. The Supreme Court has talked about looking at marriage equality next. So in some ways, kind of all of these things, how have they impacted maybe your strategic goals for now going forward post-Dobbs, and also what might have shifted since pre-Dobbs given what's happening?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, 2022 is supposed to be a year where we see the largest wave of anti-LGBTQ legislation in recent history. Just to provide a number, this year alone, state lawmakers have proposed a record of over 230 bills that would limit the rights of LGBTQ people. Some of that including, the ban to include trans people in sports, laws restricting gender affirming care for kids for kids threatening legal persecutions for their parents or doctors, or trans kids who permit or perform that care. And despite all the progress that we've made to end that discrimination, there's still millions of LGBTQ people facing barriers in every aspect of life, even here in California, and that including healthcare, housing, employment, and basic human rights. And I think all that to say that there's still a lot of work to be done. Some of our goals include, improving access to affirming mental health care for, folks throughout California, and also improving access to gender affirming care. It was just the other day I heard we had our partners for Out for Mental Health come and describing like their goals and initiatives to improve mental health in their specific areas and counties throughout California. And this specific community member in Shasta County was stating that they were listening to a community member just speak about their experience with mental health, and this specific therapist did not know what a lesbian was, like straight up was like, I don't know what that is. And it's like, it's 2022. Like, if you allegedly don't know what a lesbian is, it's because you are either outwardly just denying that care up front and not wanting to deal with that situation, slightly homophobic and not, validating that identity or experience for that person. I think there's also the huge goal of actually implementing and collecting SOGI data, so sexual orientation and gender identity data. If folks didn't know, AB 959, which was passed in 2015 and has been in effect since 2018, states that all state programs offering services to residents within California must collect SOGI data, and that has definitely not been as implemented as we would have hoped, because a lot of people aren't, these state agencies, I guess, are not trained and don't know how to collect that data. So it's oftentimes either overlooked or collected incorrectly or not frequently enough. So that in and of itself is kind of erasing our identities and making us become, an invisible group of people, because having that data is like really important to address, you know, the health needs of LGBTQ Californians. I also think that just basic education is needed, not only for healthcare providers to better treat and understand the needs of LGBTQ folks, but also just basic LGBTQ history, like starting at a young age in schools, sex education, talking about LGBTQ identities, to build that allyship from a young age, and then that can, you know, grow into allyship in the workplace and personal relationships, and even help advocate for our communities even more. So those are definitely some of our goals, and they've definitely been highlighted and even more at the forefront after everything that's happened this year. I will say one other one that just aligns a little bit more with this, with like bodily autonomy, is within the intersex community. That's something that's been a battle for years now, and we need to pause these medically unnecessary genital surgeries that are put onto children before they can even like make a decision on that. And you know, that shouldn't be a radical idea, but unfortunately, just like reproductive justice and reproductive health is, you know, here we are. So like I said, there's still a lot of work to be done. There's also, you know, strength in numbers. So I think as a community, we can do better in becoming aware of these intersecting issues. And as a community, just, you know, advocate for more policies and protections for our overall health and well-being.
Yeah, definitely. And you briefly touched on collection of sexual orientation data. Kind of what other ways have you seen privacy sort of playing a role in your work, but also, you know, the kind of data collection you're seeing within the community that kind of gives people pause. Why are you asking this question? Moments, you know.
Yeah, I think that's a little hard to answer for me since I'm no data or privacy expert, honestly. But I think the most obvious privacy issue is that in other states outside of California, where gender affirming care is, you know, illegal, there are means and ways that states have kind of jumped over that privacy gap and have been looking into like who's looking up, you know, trans affirming surgeries, or even persecuting those doctors who are trying to promote those services for care for trans youth. So I think that's a really huge issue that I think needs to be addressed more at a nationwide level, and definitely something that the network could definitely play a role in.
Yeah, definitely. Kind of brings into light a lot of these data collection that we take for granted, you know, and you realize that this information can be used in a multitude of ways that folks like, you know, consumers, regular people every day aren't really aware of. All right, well, thank you so much. I'm gonna jump over to Lauren and have a quick chat about kind of looking into what is happening on the ground. You know, what are folks experiencing? What are you seeing in your day-to-day work? Just to kick that off. So through your work with the National Advocate for Pregnant Women, what are some of the most pressing issues sort of facing pregnant people even before the Dobbs decision? You know, there's been a lot of issues prior to, now this has just made everything harder.
Right. So the bulk of our work can really be boiled down into two categories, which would be pregnancy criminalization versus civil intervention, which would be more of the family policing system, commonly known as the child welfare system. And so while we are a legal advocacy organization, we focus predominantly on pregnancy criminalization, and that is the bulk of our work. So when you're talking about before the Dobbs decision, I think it's really important that this question is asked, because there is this underlying fear that now we are entering this like apocalyptic stage. But the reality is, for most people with the capacity for pregnancy, this is the world we've already been living in, particularly for low income and BIPOC communities. And so when NEPW was first in its early stages, they started a research study, and this was happening while Roe was was on the books. And so this was from years 1973 to 2005. And between those years, they documented 413 cases. Now, from 1973 to 2020, which is just pretty recent, the numbers have almost tripled, and we have now tracked more than 1,700 arrests, prosecutions, detentions, or forced medical interventions of women or any person with the capacity for pregnancy related to their pregnancy or pregnancy outcomes. Now, states don't need abortion bans to prosecute women because they've been using murder, manslaughter, feticide, fetal assault, chemical endangerment, and the list goes on for decades. And this is because of just the culture that we live in and the way that sort of traditional, and possibly you could make the argument of religious origins of our government. And basically the attack on abortion is the attack on women. And that's the lens that the government is looking at it, although we know it is not just women that get pregnant. So I want to kind of pay respect a bit to sort of what folks were talking about, with that it is not only our tech that is betraying us, although it does, and the companies that are, manipulating and taking advantage of this data, but we do see at NAPW this pipeline of medical providers, friends and families that are thrusting someone into the criminal justice or child welfare or family policing system. What this often looks like is mandated reporting, which is something that any person that interacts with a child is required to report any suspicion of abuse. However, there are many different I guess there are things that mandated reporters don't understand, and that they may report on things that they don't need to. For example, a recent legislation called Captacara does not require someone to report substance use while pregnant, and that is not reason alone for a mandated report. However, as someone with a background in social work, we know that we're taught that if someone is just giving birth, you just automatically give a pregnancy test, and if there's a positive tox, that's an automatic report. And so a lot of the work we do at NAPW is like re-educating disciplines, teaching them where they have that freedom, where they don't have to comply with these oppressive systems, and how they can do it in a safe way. While there obviously may be options for folks that are more feel comfortable more with the civil disobedience, there are often things we can do that aren't completely legal and that we just don't know about. So that's like the first question, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's definitely great. The idea of re-educating folks, the profession doesn't stay static, whatever that might be, and being up to date on what's happening today is so important. Just taking it to post-Dobbs, since then, what have there been some issues that it's been exacerbated or generated just new areas of concern now that the decision has come down?
Yeah, and I think it's hard with this question because I don't know really what we're afraid of that hasn't already happened. I think the biggest concern will be just like, how does our strategy change now in a post-Dobbs? And I think Eva was talking a bit about how, before pre-Roe, we weren't really worrying about a lot of the data surveillance and tech concerns. And so I think that is a huge strategy shift. And I guess from our organization, a lot of our new strategy has been that re-education. We recently created a multidisciplinary guide that I can drop the link in the chat later, but that is geared towards healthcare providers, lawyers, medical examiners, child welfare workers, and policymakers. And that was really designed from a pre-Dobbs framework and anticipating when Dobbs would happen. And so I guess for us, a lot of it does feel like, this has already been happening, but we have been trying to I guess, educate the larger society on what does this look like. And thankfully for us, because we've been doing this for 20 years, we have actual tangible examples of what this looks like for folks that may not be as familiar. So I can drop that link as well.
Yeah, definitely. We're always happy to spread the resources. And I think, as John might have mentioned at the top of the hour, we'll be sending out kind of a collection of resources, some of the things that everyone's talked about. Hopefully, if anyone finds that useful or interesting, they can check it out, and we'll be sending that out. And then just to touch a little bit upon, how all of these decisions, pre, post, have uniquely impacted the BIPOC community. You did mention that a little bit, but can you go into a little more detail about that?
Yeah, right. So, I mean, pregnancy criminalization directly impacts Black, Brown, Indigenous, and poor low-income rural communities the most. Just that's like the simplest way to answer that. But just to get a little bit more into it, reproductive justice is actually a movement that was started by Black women for Black women because of intersectional feminism. And this is not something that Black women have. This is not new, this is something that especially white feminists have co-opted for a long time. And so that is like oftentimes what we like to just focus on is like starting to like pay homage to the folks that whose shoulders we stand on. And a lot of this has to do with how the war on drugs has intersected with the war on abortion. And especially a lot of the work that we do is related to folks who are pregnant and that use drugs. And as we know, with the war on drugs, this was a highly racist, offensive, oppositional initiative started by the Nixon administration, where we had different myths called like the crack baby myth that weren't rooted in any data, weren't rooted in any science, that were specifically just racist. And that's basically all that you need to know about that. But that combined with the war on abortion really kind of came to a head. And that is the work that sort of found why NAPW was founded. And our founder, Lynn Paltrow, was actually one of the attorneys on the Ferguson trial, which was a trial that was specifically in regards to non-consented and warrantless drug searches of pregnant women in more low-income communities that were specifically more Black and therefore basically classist, racist searches. But not only can we look to history when we're talking about the BIPOC community intersection, but we also look at the data. And for example, in our first study, we saw that 52% were Black, 41% were white, and 3% were Native American, and 3% were Hispanic. But so while, we did see a large chunk of the white population, it was oftentimes the rural, low-income white folks. So that's why we try to emphasize both, because it is happening for any disadvantaged population. And then especially with regard to the low income, 71% of the cases involved indigent offense, indicating low socioeconomic status.
Yeah, and that was really powerful, bringing the historical roots of the movement and understanding where it's come from and where it can go next. And this is more of kind of a general question, kind of what have there been impacts on pregnant people in general, kind of outside of the privacy context, impact on other access to healthcare that you've maybe have seen? There's news stories about kind of young children who are trying to access different medication, arthritis medication, and pharmacies are like, oh, well, actually that's used in abortion, so we're going to put a pause on your medication, even though that's really necessary for them. So have you seen kind of some of these scenes playing out, or how can folks also respond to them?
Yeah, I mean, I will say that's a bit out of our expertise. We don't deal a ton with that, but we, like everyone, have been hearing the stories of just medical misinformation. I I would say like one of the biggest things that we have seen is in regards to like ectopic pregnancies and how people are losing access to treatment, and that hospitals are looking to lawyers rather than medical providers on whether or not they should give life-saving care. And just sort of the confusion on whether an ectopic treating ectopic pregnancy is the same as an abortion. And it's not, because an ectopic pregnancy, that fetus is not viable and therefore it's not really an abortion, but there's this misinformation. And so I definitely think we see a lot of that. And I think that's why we do focus on a very multidisciplinary approach, because there's so many disciplines that like come to a head, and that's sort of why we see the problems we are.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Talking about kind of impacts on BIPOC communities, also just folks who are pregnant. We're going to bring all our panelists back in together for a group discussion about kind of legislative and potential policy solutions, or kind of what folks want to see coming from their legislatures. You know, we've discussed so many problems that have occurred and areas of concern, but can we try to shore things up, address them? I just want to kind of talk a little briefly about federally. Also, there's been a new bill introduced by Congresswoman Sarah Jacobs called My Body, My Data Act, and it has been introduced in the House of Representatives. And the act has discussed ways to provide consumer more control and protection over their sexual health and reproductive data. California has also passed a series of abortion protection bills this past legislative season. So for the panelists here, looking at the legislative work to protect reproductive rights federally and in other states, what are some elements you would ideally wish for to see, or rights that you believe should be essential to be included in kind of a hypothetical bill, the perfect bill, so to speak, if we can create one? Anyone can jump in, feel free.
I mean, obviously, the My Body, My Data Act is very interesting, and EFF supports it. There are also some really interesting things that are happening at the state and county and city level, especially in cities and counties that are located in these sort of anti-choice states, but where you have enclaves of heavy concentrations of pro-choice voters. And so what you're starting to see is cities essentially saying that we're not going to help law enforcement enforce these laws. We're not going to help them go and look for people who may have gotten abortions. And that's a very good sign. That's actually something that we also saw during the sort of crackdown on illegal immigration in the Trump administration. As sort of a as local law enforcement and as local officials, we're not actually under an obligation to help you. We may lose that email. We may not call you back. We're all going to drag our feet. And I think that has some potential for a positive impact. I think the most important thing to remember is that all of these struggles are connected. That the struggle for the rights of immigrants and the rights of Muslims and the rights of the BIPOC community in the face of the war on drugs are all connected to one another, and that the tools that state and federal governments use in order to carry out sort of the war on abortion are the same as the ones that we've seen to carry out the war on drugs and the war on terror. And so we have many of the same tools for fighting back, and we can really learn from these experiences.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, understanding the intersectionality, also partly why we've brought together so many folks from different disciplines. Great to hear. Did Lauren or Ari, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what we would add is just sort of maybe more broadly our legislative recommendations when it comes to pregnancy criminalization, which would be opposing and repealing fetal personhood laws, feticide laws. For those that don't know what that is, a personhood law is basically what a law that is giving a fetus the same constitutional rights as a person, as a human. And a feticide law would be making it murder to terminate a pregnancy with a fetus. And also limiting unnecessary reporting of pregnancy outcomes and prenatal conduct to CPS, banning forced medical interventions against pregnant women. But then just sort of, I guess, more narrow into this topic, I think just upon looking at the My Body, My Data bill, it does seem that that is a really strong bill, but I guess one of the limitations we observed is that it doesn't inherently tackle the idea of prohibiting a provider from releasing medical intervention in response to a subpoena. But this is one that actually Mia Bonta out of Oakland, this bill, AB 2091, that does tackle it. So I think that's a really good model bill that definitely gets a bit closer. So.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And I think we'll hopefully provide more of those bills that you've mentioned in our kind of wrap up, send out to folks as well. Also kind of shifting gears a little bit, many states have passed or are looking to pass biometric information protection acts. California is looking to pass one. I think PRC is working on putting one up for California legislature. Illinois famously has passed the very first one. For the panelists, what role do you think biometric protection laws can play in protecting reproductive rights? Give folks a minute to think about this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is, slightly out of our expertise, just, saying that, but I think that the way that I understand it would be that the combination of biometric information and reproductive health data is what is most alarming. Maybe not the biometric information alone, but that combined in a court of law can be really, really harmful for a court case. But I definitely defer to our other panelists on what they think about this question.
Well, one of the big concerns that that EFF has surrounds the use of facial recognition data by law enforcement, and we have supported bills that essentially outlaw the use of facial recognition data by law enforcement, partially because it's so frequently wrong. It has tremendous racial bias, and we are very worried about it being used to as a way of locating people throughout cities where there are CCTV cameras sort of ubiquitously placed, or other types of security cameras. And we're also really concerned about the use of facial recognition as part of sort of a dragnet. You place a camera outside of a Planned Parenthood clinic and just wait to see who shows up. This has, a very low-tech method, or low-tech version of this has been used by anti-choice activists for many years. They essentially wait outside of clinics and not only take note of the faces of the people who are going back and forth, who are entering the clinic for a variety of reasons, some of which have nothing to do with ending pregnancies, but also would write down the license plates of cars that would park in the parking lot around the clinic in order to identify people who are entering the clinic. So another concern that we have, in addition to biometric data, is actually the use of automated license plate readers in the vicinity of clinics.
And California just recently authorized or okayed the use of electronic digital license plate readers, and digital license plates. So we'll see how that kind of
This will
changes.
surely end well for everyone.
Oh, surely it'll make things so much easier to figure out who is where.
It will totally stop crime.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So we are getting a few kind of audience participation questions, so I will move into the Q&A portion. One question that I have here, let's see. Besides protecting abortion access in states like California and Washington, what can organizers and advocates do in abortion protective states to help women in abortion banned states?
I'm not sure what you mean by organizers. If you have people who are already doing abortion support, my advice is very different from sort of just ordinary people who want to help. For ordinary people who want to help, I recommend giving money to abortion funds. Just literally write a check, hand over cash. Abortion funds are strapped for money right now, and they are the people with the boots on the ground directly helping people who are currently in crisis. This is the single best thing that I think people who are looking for something to do and who feel really terrified and helpless right now can do. One of the things that I saw when the Dobbs decision was announced were a lot of people who were posting to their social media accounts that, like, so if you want to go camping and come stay at my place and everything is going to be fine, and sort of these auntie networks. I think it would be really useful for people to understand that these networks already exist, and that these networks are based largely on trust. Trying to recreate these networks on your own is not only not useful, but potentially dangerous. And furthermore, kind of masking this all in a discussion of camping fools no one, including governments and law enforcement. So if you feel the need to make one of these posts, just write a check to an abortion fund. Everything is going to be fine. It will be so much more useful.
Yeah. Lauren, Ari, anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I would just second that and say, like, I think everyone is an organizer and can be one in a lot of multiple ways, and just even starting those conversations, I think, with your loved ones who, don't maybe 100% agree with you about abortions, I think will definitely help just destigmatize, abortions in general. And I know those conversations are often not the easiest or the number one topic that comes to mind, especially like holidays are coming up. You're going to be around your family more often than not. And, it can be tense to kind of have those more political and politically charged conversations, I guess, around different issues. But I think that's definitely somewhere to start if you don't have funds to donate to abortion funds. Just helping to create more advocacy work and destigmatizing the idea of abortions, I think, is really important within your own circles and friends and family.
Yeah. So I want to get back to a little bit about how folks who might not be financially able to donate can advocate. But there is a question about what are specific funds that any of our panelists might recommend donating to.
Oh man, I have an entire Google page or Google sheet of just lists of abortion funds. If you give me a moment, I will go find the link and I will put it in the chat.
Perfect, beautiful. I think, some folks are potentially wary of donating in case, they're not donating to the right ones, or there's always concerns that the organization doesn't fully support or do the things that they propose to do on their website. So that's always great to have some trusted sources. While we wait for that, kind of jumping onto Ari's point. Oh, here it is. I see it. All right.
I've done this before.
Definitely. So are there any specific or ones that you think are good first places for people to start looking on your list?
Let me see if I can find, there are some in Texas that I
This is awesome and super comprehensive.
So yeah, I personally recommend the T Fund, which is based out of Texas, and which you can find under T on this list.
Excellent. And I think we'll hopefully include this list with some of the resources, or at least some of the orgs on here, so folks don't have to scramble to write it all down right now. All right. Oh, yes. Yeah, I think the list that Eva had dropped only went to the panelists, and but we can hopefully add that to the resources at the end, or if you can drop that in the wider chat. I'm not sure if that's an available function. I will defer to John on that. Okay, John said he's got it shared out to everyone. Perfect, beautiful. Yeah, so back to one of the questions that I really wanted to kind of dig into, which was, what are other ways, non-monetary ways that people can get involved in terms of supporting their, local city, state, county, etc. What are some recommendations?
I can go ahead and jump in. I think that non-monetary, you can look at volunteering and spreading awareness. Specifically, though, I think when you're looking at trying to volunteer with an org, maybe finding a local smaller organization, those are often the ones that need the most assistance. And also think about what are the skills you have to offer this org, and kind of come in with that. And then that can be really, really helpful, because oftentimes organizations are getting like all of these volunteer requests and they don't exactly know, what are the tasks that they can provide. A lot of times orgs are looking for help with legislative advocacy, grassroots organizing, tabling, canvassing, and political advocacy. You can help support a political campaign of maybe a piece of legislation, but you can also support a potential elected official that you align with, especially with regards to reproductive justice. But I do definitely support the monetary option, especially even if it's a small amount. A lot of organizations now are offering like small monthly donations, like $5 a month, things like that. There are creative ways to do that if you don't want to volunteer your time, or you don't have the capacity to volunteer your time. Spreading awareness is obviously kind of one of those things that doesn't always feel like super helpful, and kind of feels like maybe can be performative. And so I think when you are looking at that, you have to be very intentional and thoughtful. Like, I think, what Ariela was talking about with your small community, trying to like help start these conversations is really important. So, but there are a lot to do, and I definitely support folks that are already doing the work, and rather than trying to start things on your own, like my fellow panelists have mentioned.
Yeah, that's great. Go for it.
Sorry, just to add on to that, like I know, Lauren, you mentioned politically, getting involved, and next week there is an election, and there is a proposition in California that it would specifically add the right to an abortion directly in the California state constitution, to ensure that people in California have the continue to control their own bodily autonomy and personal decisions. So voting, of course, age granted, you're 18 and able to vote. That is a free way to get involved in this issue. And yeah, Proposition 1 would essentially safeguard these rights for future attacks from the federal government. And yeah, it's a very important initiative that everyone can and should take a part in. So just my little plug in to vote next Tuesday, because it's important.
Definitely agree. Eva, anything else to add to that?
No, I think you guys have done a great job.
Awesome. So that is all for the kind of the Q&A. I think folks have answered some really great questions about how to get involved in particular. I know there's a lot of folks on the call who might be interested to kind of do more, as everyone has pointed out, to somehow take action. So we will provide info for the funds that have been mentioned, and hopefully people can, take that as a first step. Let's see here. All right, well, I think we're going to wrap it up a little early today. So I want to thank everyone for joining this incredibly important discussion. And we've only gotten a slice of it. This is just touching the surface levels of so many issues. So, hopefully this conversation will continue off the internet, in your small communities with folks in your life. So today, the fight for reproductive justice and access to healthcare no longer ends at the physical bodily autonomy, but also extends to digital autonomy and all areas of healthcare. Reproductive health and access is healthcare at the end of the day. So I want to thank you all again, and thank you attendees for attending today and listening to us talk about this.
Yes, thank you so much for hosting, and I definitely learned a thing or two from everyone here, so appreciate y'all sharing your wisdom and knowledge.
Thank you.
Seconded.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to fight beside you.
Yeah, and I just dropped this in the chat, but if anybody would like a 2-page summary of this conversation with a list of all the resources that were mentioned, please just email me. And I dropped my email in the chat for everyone. But yeah, have a great Friday and a great rest of your weekend, y'all.
Cool. End the recording.